Hello. Uh, Hope everything's going okay. You're feeling magical, etc. Um, yeah, welcome to the Fantastic Beasts live stream, which is, to be honest, it sounds a lot more dramatic and enthralling than it actually is. And, well, I hope that it's entertaining, and hello everyone. I'm glad that you're excited for everything, Sithal. Um, Please, before we begin or anything, and just a note for the entire stream, etc., let me know if the audio is okay. I've been fiddling a lot, just a lot of fiddling when it comes to the audio, and I'm absolutely not entirely sure what sounds good at this point. So, right now, I have a compressor and a noise gate running, and it's, well, Lord knows if it'll end up working. But yes, everybody made it, and here we go. So, as I mentioned before, this is this is. Sorry, I'm getting distracted by the messages in the chat. This is the Fantastic Beast stream. We're just going to take a look at some of the creatures and, in occasion, some of the things in the Fantastic Beasts film. It was part of a request by one of the viewers of the channel, and I thought that the easiest way to do this would be to actually do it through a live stream, especially after testing it the other week, last month specifically. So yeah, that's pretty much what it is. And at any point, please, guys, during the chat, if you have anything that you'd like to add or stuff that you'd like me to consider or look up even, then just mention it. Hopefully the chat won't get so busy that I can't keep track of anything, so yeah. And, well, hello, Jamelia. I hope that explanation served you well. I'm not entirely sure what else I could say. So yeah, let's get to it. With that, I hope you don't mind my mouse clicks. For some reason, these things seem to be going through the microphone, but whatever. So, let's take a look at it. And the first thing that I wanted to cover was the bag. We see right from the beginning of the story that Newt, the main character of this film, has a non-Newtonian, no, not non-Newtonian, non-Euclidean bag. There we go. Non-Newtonian means that it moves weird. Non-Euclidean in that the inside is a lot larger than the outside. So the main problem with this, and the main thing that I wanted to ask, is just how the I nearly swore. How on earth does it work? Because we've got quite a few scenes where, well, a lot of weird things are happening. And it's a very prominent feature in this entire story, where we see that the Ministry of Magic is actually using it, tucking their entire building in sort of a corner to the municipal office there in New York. It's, I don't know, it's really overused, in my opinion, but whatever. So, this is the scene that made me think, how on earth does this work? Because we've got Kowalski standing in the bag here, jumping, and he's lifting the bag up with him. So he's applying a force in the bag that's causing the bag to lift up. And the bag is full of things inside, specifically delicate environments. I'll come back to that image now, but let's go over here. We've got this very delicate environment over here where there's rocks and stuff, sitting there delicately by placement of the beetles, and yet they're not falling over. So I'm not entirely sure exactly how that would work. And you say it's possibly a wormhole. Well, I was thinking that it could be something along those lines, but the orientation of the bag keeps changing, and I'm not entirely sure that, well, a wormhole is a 3D object, so basically it'll look like a sphere if you map it onto the world. And the bag clearly represents it as a 2D object, like a sort of like a door, just this plane upon after which you cross. So I don't know if a wormhole is exactly the best representation, but it could be. It could be. But then the question would be: is how do these creatures keep getting out of this this little wormhole that he's built over here. Especially because it seems to be compressing a lot of the things. Later on, when we get to the Arumphit, you'll notice that it actually sucks the creature in. It's a bit weird. So yeah. But anyway, let's go back. Seen series of rocks stacked like this. Well, no, the issue isn't the skill of stacking rocks like this. The issue is, why aren't they falling over when Kowalski is jumping like this? Because essentially he's occupying both spaces at this point. And, well, to me it was just confusing. This isn't actually the main focus of this entire stream, just to be clear. It's just one of the weirdest things that I noticed from this entire little story. And obviously inside, I kept skipping this image, but inside he's actually standing on a ladder that he later falls down from. And well, yeah, it's just, to me it looks very odd, and nobody notices. Nothing actually happens. And I suppose we could say, yeah, it's magic, but I don't know. I suppose, Sathal, your idea of a wormhole is perhaps the best, but who knows? Anyway, over to the actual creatures. Let's transition here. So, the first little creature that I wanted to talk about, and perhaps the easiest one to do, is the bowtruckle. You're probably all familiar with the stick insect. And, well, the bowtruckle is clearly a representation of the stick insect in this series. But, of course, it's a lot more intelligent, by an order of magnitude. We see that the bowtruckle is, expressing a personality over here. It really doesn't want to leave Newt's hand. And it's also being bullied by its fellow bowtruckles. Which sort of, how could I say, it makes me wonder about how we should actually represent intelligence in fantasy. You see, we're not exactly sure what causes something to be intelligent in the way that you and I would understand it. Dolphin brains and indeed whale brains are larger than ours and have more convolutions, that is to say, more little bumpy bits. The bumpy bits are important because basically the more surface area you have for grey matter, then ostensibly the more intelligent the creature is. And we see over here, in this fantasy representation of an intelligent creature, that it is incredibly small and therefore also has a tiny brain. And we know that size doesn't necessarily relate to our intelligence because, well, again, we're more intelligent than dolphins and whales. So, well, I suppose, okay, maybe we're not more intelligent, but we're actually showing more technical creativity than dolphins and whales. I suppose if they had hands, maybe they would be able to do a lot more things, so, yeah. And I was just wondering, how in fantasy should we measure all of these things? It's a little bit difficult. Okay, well, cheerio, Jamelia. Sorry, this wasn't going to be the most interesting stream, but do enjoy. Yeah. I wonder. You see, again, this is a part where the little creature is trying to hold on. And a lot of insects tend to do that actually out of habit. They try to keep their equilibrium. There's a little sac in your ear that is full of water, the inner ear area actually, and it tries to maintain your balance. Through that, using a similar system, the creatures that you tend to have crawling over your hands, like beetles, etc., always try to keep that equilibrium upright and stable. So if you hold your hand upside down, the creature tends to run up. So I don't know if this is automatic behavior or if it's just really, really smart. Maybe it's not an invertebrate. It could be an animal that is mimicking a stick insect. That's possible. That is possible. There are a series of reflexes that act purely from neurons, as opposed to having any relation to... Yes, with descent view, actually those are called neural nets. They're usually found in more simple creatures like the Hydra. And actually you can get marginally complex behavior with independent reactors. That is to say, muscles that respond to stimulus from the environment. So, yeah, it's quite interesting. You find that in Venus flytraps, for example, and again, also more simple creatures. And yeah, it could be a really small vertebrate creature, but I don't know if there's a size limit on vertebrates, because I mean, what's the smallest creature that we could think of? Maybe like a hamster. Is there anything smaller than a hamster, or maybe a mouse? Hmm. Oh well, if you know of anything there, do let me know in the chat. But anyway, for example, anything we do related to temperature, i.e., if we touch something hot, we react before the brain. Yeah, that's actually related to the spinal column and the reflexes built in there. That's not actually, I think, independent reactors in your body. I think that's just the spinal cord responding to things. Because if you look at the spinal cord, it actually does contain gray matter, but it's internal. So there's sort of a switch that occurs where in your cerebral cortex, the gray matter's on the outside and you have a lot of the white matter on the inside. And then it sort of does this reversal as you go down the spine. And, well, directly from that we get to, well, reflexes. There's a minuscule tree frog that is smaller than your fingernail. Okay, you know what? Let's see. I'm going to go to the googly thing. Tiny vertebrates. And let's see what happens here. Smallest organisms. You know what? Let's be lazy and look at Wikipedia. I'm going to quickly also do the transition to the browser. There we go. So, the smallest vertebrate. Animals. Eukaryotes. Okay, we don't care about that. Mollusks, arthropods, smallest crustacean, arachnids, insects, viri. It says the smallest crustacean, smallest arthropod, 94 micrometers. Wow, that's actually quite tiny. As for insects, it talks about a parasitic wasp. So, 139 micrometers. Those vertebrates. The smallest vertebrate and the smallest amphibian known are Padrophene amunsis. Let's try and zoom in over here. Padrophene amunsis from Papua New Guinea, which range from 7 to 8 millimeters. Okay, that's interesting. With an average length of 7.7 millimeters. Previously, the title of the smallest vertebrate was held by members of the fish genus Chromatophores. I'm not going to try and pronounce these words. It's very early over here. My apologies if I do sound a little bit offish, and in fact, I suppose I got the stream off on the wrong foot. I got back from Osaka rather late last night, so my deepest apologies. It's not the most professional thing to do, but yeah. Anyway, this creature is the size of a freaking coin, less than the size of a coin. Well, wait, a US dime. Okay, there we go. I'm not actually familiar with the size of US currency, so I'll assume that that's just blimming small. Yeah. Yeah, googly thing. Well, I couldn't think of the word for Google at the time, so do forgive me. Anyway, so back to the bowtruckle. This is the scene that really got me, because it's actually unlocking handcuffs. So it understands what handcuffs are for, what they do, and how the mechanism works. Either that, or it was just playing around and this is its natural habit. It actually gets a little bit more interesting with physics with Nif Ler, but he's next, so yeah. An octopus can be really small and they seem to show the ability to problem solve. They are the only intelligent life form outside of the mammalian species tree that are intelligent. Yes, that is true. I recall there is an incredibly tiny and incredibly poisonous type of octopus, the blue-ringed octopus, in fact, that is like just really, really dangerous because of that size. So yeah, And don't worry about YouTube cutting your comments to 200 characters. Just send those messages in the series. The practical upshot of having not many people on here is that I can read your messages quite easily. So, sakini dozo. But yeah, let's take a look at the blue-ringed octopus. Actually, go back to the googly thing, and tiny. Let's see. Oh dear. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. How terrible, how awful. It is preposterously cute, some of these photoshops. Look at that. Look at that. It's wearing a tiny top hat. And, well, yeah, here we go. We can see a whole bunch of tiny little octopodi. I just literally googled tiny octopus, as you can see on the top there, because I'm lazy. Yeah. I wonder actually whether these smaller octopodi would be intelligent or not, because a lot of the creatures that we do the experiments on are actually cuttlefish rather than octopodi. I think that's the conjugate. How do you conjugate octopus into a plural? I could have sworn that it was octopodi because it's pod for foot, podi, podus, octopi. Okay, well, whatever. Anyway, so that's a thing. There's also the fact that the animal has 6 limbs, making it an invertebrate, since there's never been a hexapodal vertebrate. Although, doesn't the octopus have 8 limbs? I mean, if we... This one, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This tiny thing has 6, but there might be 2 in the back there. I don't know. Anyway, that's just an aside. Let's go back to the topics. Wow, this is proving to be a bit of a wonky stream. Anyway, I think that's it for the bow truckle. So on to the next creature, which is Nif Ler. Yay. This creature is weird. Not because he has one of those non-Euclidean little pockets in his stomach. Just for other reasons, but we'll get there shortly. Titular creature, well, not a titular creature, sorry, what am I saying? One of the more popular creatures from the series, and had his face all over the advertising campaigns related to this. I really wanted to go into him because although he looks very British in design, I'm reminded of the British moles. In fact, I've got one of those images up here. He is still nevertheless a platypus, an Australian creature. If we look at him over here, he is also quite smart. He knows that he's been watched, and he is hiding the fact... Well, he knows what he's doing is at least not desirable to Newt. I don't know whether he understands what he's doing is wrong, per se, but he knows that he's going to get in trouble. And in fact, that's one of the main things that we see throughout this series, is that the creature's intelligence levels are really quite high. So I don't know if we're looking at things through Newt's eyes, that this is how he perceives the creatures, because he does actually interact with them as though they were human beings. Going back to the bow truckle, he does say to it, you know, they're not going to bully you, and nanny, 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 nanny. So I wonder if a lot of our perspective as the viewers isn't affected by how Newt actually sees things. And this being one of the more popular scenes from the advertising campaign, where we see all of this delicious jewelry flopping out of his stomach pouch thing as he flies backwards. I was wondering how this works, because this goes back to the bag. They're using the Accio spell to bring Nif Ler towards them, but they're also pulling jewelry out, and the jewelry is flying out backwards. So I really want to know exactly what are the rules for this entire thing. How does this work? How does the non-Euclidean geometry work in this series? How does that magic work in particular? The amazing thing about intelligence animals is that it is different per species. Neil deGrasse Tyson has done a series on dog intelligence. He's shown that dogs are able to show a degree of empathy. Well, actually, you know, I was reading a book many years ago about neuroscience in animals. And one of the persons that wrote the book had been suggesting that the personality, the actual property of having a personality, was not something that the brain inherently produced, but it was contagious, sort of like one of those mimetic infection thingies with meme theory. And that by interacting with dogs quite a lot, we had been able to give them personalities. Now, obviously, I'm not entirely sure as to the efficacy of this kind of assertion, but it is still an interesting idea. Any dog owner would vouch, instantly that dogs do have personalities and are generally quite friendly animals. And what is more, they I think like some of the larger ones can have an IQ of 70. So I wonder if this is related to whether the dog has a the capacity to have a personality, or whether this is again something that we've just bred into them. Because usually when human beings start breeding an animal, we breed them to be less intelligent than the wilder versions because they're easier for us to control. If you look at what was the name of that book? Guns, Germs, and Steel. The writer, Jared Diamond. There we go. I knew his name was easy to remember. Diamond. Ugh, I'm an idiot. And hello, Kwazu playing guardsman. And I'll get to you shortly, Synthal. He was mapping out the motivations and limitations to taming animals, and basically was going on that the animals needed several qualities. They needed to be herd animals, and with a hierarchy, so that we could control the hierarchy. And then, secondly, the other thing that the animals required was a lack of fear and a lack of intelligence. And then after we began breeding them, like in the way that we did the aurochs into the cow, the animals just became dumber and sort of really dependent on human beings to survive. The majority of animals that we have turned into farm animals, etc., I don't think would actually be able to survive on their own if we just suddenly disappeared. Dogs might be able to survive, I suppose, just because they're quite intelligent. They didn't lose their intelligence, and I think that's something that we specifically bred for. But generally, a lot of the animals that we do breed become quite dumb. Why was I talking about that? I have no idea. And yes, do enjoy baking your chicken. I hope that my droning voice can entertain you at least for a little bit. And I'll try to cut down on the ums and ahs. I'm being rather silly with that. Going back to Synthal, this animal is definitely a marsupial, but I don't recall any mammal being very attracted towards shiny materials. Um, hmm. I wonder if there is any actually any such creature. Let's go to Google again. This is actually making me very lazy. I should have known all of this and prepared for all this ahead of time, but we live and learn. So, mammalian, shiny attraction. Let's see. There's raccoons, and of course, human beings are attracted to shiny objects. Um, let's just take a look at these pictures quickly. So, as you can see, I did a terrible Google search, and I've got a whole bunch of pictures. In most cases, we've just got crows that they're showing us. So, oh, a raven. Okay, I'm clearly not a bird person. And this person mentions animals. Often nocturnal. Here on Pinterest, this person suggests that they're attracted to shiny objects. Okay, no, actually, I don't think so. This is a ridiculous thing. I should have actually looked this up a little bit better beforehand. We'll leave the shiny objects for mammals for now. That's an interesting thing. Let me actually make a point of that. Write that down. There we go. Black. Shiny objects. Attraction. in mammals. Okay. Very good. Very good. That was me scribbling. I hope you enjoyed that delicious noise. So yeah. Back to Nif Ler. Yes. Okay. When we domesticate animals, traits that are attributed to neoteny become more pronounced and extended. So domesticating animals, keeping animals eternally children. Yes. Just for anybody not familiar with neoteny, neoteny means to remain as the original form, like the pre-adolescent form, if you will, of the creature. A good example of this is the salamander, where it actually, no, not the salamander, the axolotl, sorry, the axolotl, which retains its juvenile form despite ostensibly eventually growing into some kind of salamander thing. Just through evolution, it has discarded its adult form. Under certain conditions, it can undergo its metamorphosis into the adult state. That's neoteny. So yeah, foxes maybe like shiny things. I assume based on their attraction to human societies. I know magpies are attracted to shiny things. Magpies are not mammals; they're birds. That's the thing. That's why we couldn't actually look at the birds as such. Why I discarded the raven as an option. We're assuming, of course, that the Nif Ler is in fact a mammal. I don't know what Newt would have clarified him to be in his book. Didn't Rowling write an actual guide to fantastic beasts? Because that might actually inform us as to whether Newt is a mammal or not. But I doubt that she would have mentioned something so specific. And you also just notice that it has an opposable thumb, which is quite surprising. And marsupial, yes. No. Again, is it a marsupial? Because where did I put it? There we go. I think it looks very similar to this, a common British mole. You'll notice that the mole has what appears to be almost 6 digits and very wide hands. And I wouldn't be surprised that the actual Nif Ler is based on this. I had pulled up, I don't know if any of you noticed, but I had pulled up the wiki for Fantastic Beasts on the off chance that we would need it. And hang on, excuse me one moment. Tried to clear my throat away from the microphone, but nevertheless my microphone picked it up. I hope you all enjoyed that. So let me quickly turn over here, go back to the browser, and fade. Okay, so I pulled up the wiki in preparation for any thing that we might need to take a look at. But I will say that the wiki is very hyperbolic, and when we get to the Nudnu, the pufferfish panther, you'll see what I mean. I'll actually mention that. So if we look over here at the Nif Ler, its native range is Britain, which is why I think that this is in fact supposed to be a mole. And that doesn't mean that it has necessarily an opposable thumb, but as you can see by this image over here, he may well have. I suppose that helps him with stealing things. And in fact, when we get to the more interesting picture shortly, it certainly does. It certainly does. There was one more thing. Yes. I remember reading a while ago an interesting science fiction story where the writer had invented this species of sort of lizard creature that had evolved intelligence not as a direct need for any life-gaining powers, but more specifically as a tool in which to get more shiny objects. So their entire psyche was based around collecting shiny things, usually money, obviously, for the purposes of the story. But I wonder if Nif Ler wouldn't have evolved his opposable thumb to, well, acquire shiny things, sort of like a rapper almost. Yes, that was a dig at rappers. I was thinking of rappers with their shiny objects and stuff. Okay, yeah, that's. I think you know what. Let's leave it at that for waffling on about Nif Ler. So let's go back here, quickly finish him off. And Kwazu playing Guardians. Brit or in Australia? No, I'm actually from Africa. I'm South African, which is why this is of mildly low quality. We have to. I'm actually having a small child run with a phone cup and squeaking down a telephone line. No, 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 no. Right now I'm sitting in the middle of Japan, but my accent is a bit odd for an African. So there you go. Um, but going back to Nif Ler, there is we see his fascination over here, particularly in the bank, and that actually gets me to another point. Oh wait, hang on. Here was the platypus. I forgot the order that I put these things in. Sorry, I had memorized this and prepared it over the last 2 days. Now, come showtime, obviously I'm forgetting things. Murphy's law and all. So yeah, I was going to say that he does resemble a platypus, and also on the notes of digits, we can see the platypus has quite a few over here, and in fact the male platypus, okay, again I'm not sure how to conjugate that, would have a poison stick thingy. God no, poison. Why is English failing me today? Oh dear. Okay, a poison barb. They have a poison barb at the back of the hind foot, and I think that's kind of represented in the image that you're seeing over here, which could be something that Nif Ler has, but they don't mention him being venomous, so that's a thing. Another thing is that we also see Nif Ler crawling through the vault door here, so not only does he have the ability to put a lot of things inside of his pouch, but he has the ability to compress his own volume, which is weird. I myself thought that rats and the like were actually capable of collapsing their skeleton, because that was an old wives' tale that people had told people and children for ages, but it turns out that rats can't actually collapse their skeletons. I know, I only discovered this while researching for this stream. I'm an idiot. So, there you go. It's just that rats and mice are quite fluffy, so it looks like they're fitting into spaces that are smaller than them, but they are in fact, not collapsing their bones. That would have been really weird. They said that the detection methods that the rats use to see whether they can fit into a space is with their whiskers. So basically, if the whiskers can move in, then so can the rest of the creature. And I vaguely recall something from when I was younger, running around school and popping through fences, that people would measure their ability to fit through the fence with their heads. So that was perhaps not the best idea, but it worked. So I don't know if that actually counts. It also turns out that fat rats do have difficulty getting into holes that their whiskers say is possible for them to pass through. So, make of that what you will. Here's the interesting part. Yes, there we go. Yeah, I'm glad that I could help you over there, Distant View. I'm surprised. The stream seems to be a lot faster on updates than it was before, so I wonder if YouTube didn't do something. But yeah, again, back to the scene. This is very, very interesting, because over here we can see, as Sithal was saying, he's using his thumb to hold these jewelry thingies. And what interested me here was that, look at that, he's holding freaking gold. Do you know how heavy gold is? It is monstrously, I think it's something like 192 times heavier than hydrogen. It's absolutely massive. Back home in South Africa, we have a place in the middle of Johannesburg called Gold Reef City. And there's this sort of gold smelting event that you can go and watch. And one of the challenges is that if you can lift the gold after it's been smelted with one hand, you get to keep it. Now, there's two factors that do affect this, which is gold is very slippery. It's quite smooth, so it's very difficult to grip. But my word, it is also monstrously heavy. And we've got this tiny creature holding a bar of gold. That is not what he's got in his pouch. He picked that up and started sliding that into his pouch with one paw. Nif Ler is strong. Wow. I don't know why he doesn't just, destroy Newt whenever Newt tries to pick him up or do something with him. It's, my word. Yes, swole. Oh, gosh. So it's to me it's very interesting to see Nif Ler doing this, and a lot of the strength is heavier than lead. Yeah, I think it is heavier than lead. Let me just check. Molar mass of gold. Molar mass gold. If I remember, it was something like 196 grams per mole. So yeah, gold is 196 grams per mole, and I'm assuming lead is lighter. Molar mass of lead. Lead. Oh no. Okay, no. Lead is 207.2 grams per mole. So yeah, there you go. That's okay. Wait, I can't remember. Is molar mass measured in kilograms or grams? Either way. So yeah, I'll quickly put up the browser screen just so you can see. So there's the molar mass of lead, and we can see that that's quite high. And I just searched gold, which is there, 196 grams per mole, 0.9. So it is a small difference, only what 10 grams or so, but yeah. That's still heavier. There you go. So either way, Newt is in a lot of danger, I think, because Nif Ler is really, really, really strong. Yeah. And there we see Newt is flipping him out, and we get a better look of the gold that he's carrying. Admittedly, that is a small bar. I was going to say that the bar back home in South Africa that we're challenged to pick up is rather large. It's about I think about a liter of gold. So yeah, it is quite heavy. But nevertheless, this tiny creature about the size of Newt's hand is holding a gold brick, a gold bar, not a brick, a gold bar, also about the size of Newt's hand. It's quite shocking. And yes, there we also see the Nif Ler hiding in a small crevice. I was going to say that he's clearly not collapsing himself in any way over here, so I wonder if he can sustain the smaller size, the push-through size that he was seen doing in the vault. Again, why is my English failing me? And yeah, that's basically Nif Ler. Let me quickly check the chat again, just to make sure that I have not missed anything else that you guys might have said. Okay, yeah, heavier than... Okay, so don't worry. Don't worry about being incorrect, because I am often incorrect. I often make a fool of myself. That's why we're here. We're here to learn. I did do research on these things, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I'm correct. So, yeah. The Demiguise is our next little creature that we're going to be looking at, and my word, look at how invisible it is. Here it is holding an apple. If you guys remember, the Demiguise is the sloth-like creature that goes invisible throughout the series, and Newt comments on how difficult it was to catch. And I wonder whether this is a camouflage or genuine invisibility, because we see it over here. It's holding an apple, and it's not, displaying any apple-shaped stuff. Weird question, but I heard that the only supply of gold in the world is as large as 2 swimming pools. As large as 2 swimming pools. I do remember hearing the same thing. There was a documentary a while ago that asserted it was the size of Olympic swimming pools, a pair of Olympic swimming pools. But let me check. Okay, let's put the Demiguise on pause to answer our questions about gold. Total gold collected in the world. Okay, that was terrible spelling. And I'm going to go straight to BBC News, where, because I'm lazy, we're going to try and read this. It says, how much gold is there in the world? Let's see. It says, imagine if you were a supervillain who had taken control of all the world's gold and had decided to melt it down to make a cube. How long would the size be? Hundreds of meters, thousands even? Actually, it's unlikely to be anything that size. Warren Buffett, one of the world's richest inventors, says that the total amount of gold in the world, the gold above ground that is, could fit into a cube with sides of just 20 meters. So that's 20 meters by 20 meters. Okay, now, mind you, 20 meters is not anything to scoff at, but that is actually a surprisingly small amount. The cube, so a cube made of 171,300 tons would be just about 20.7 meters on each side, or to put it another way, it would reach about 9.8 meters above the ground level if exactly covering Wimbledon Centre Court. But not everyone agrees with the GMS figures. So it seems that it's waffling around here and here. Well, not waffling, it's wavering around here and here. But this larger figure says 50 meters. So I don't know. It's clearly not a large amount. This is an illustration that they have on the BBC, so this is all of the gold in the world. The yellow obviously being the gold, if you didn't know. So again, that's not a lot of gold, but gold is exceedingly rare. Remember, anything heavier than iron has to be made in like supernovas. Why am I talking like a teenager? That's a good question. So naturally occurring gold is very, very difficult to generate. No, I mean, also artificial gold is difficult to generate. What am I saying? It's just not very common. So having a planet seeded with gold would be difficult to find, especially one such as ours, where, we're not that close to the center of the galaxy, etc. Anyway, back to the demiguise. That was a weird side note. So, again, the demiguise does clearly seem to be invisible here, but now I have a criticism of this because it doesn't make sense. Here, its eyes are open on the image of this woman, making a rather odd view. But then, immediately afterwards, it starts to move, and it's pulling, we've got some residual image over here. So, is it invisible or is it camouflaging? I would assume that it would have to camouflage, because if it's invisible, it's not interacting with light, and therefore I don't know how it would see the world or anything, because light is not reaching its retina to see, but here it's doing something else, so good grief. It's a nice effect for the film to have done, but I don't know, it doesn't make sense if you think about it for a few minutes, and this is not supposed to be a critique of Fantastic Beasts and the magic therein, but it is something that I noticed that was a bit odd. Reminds you of the Changewig from How to Tame Your Dragon, which possesses the same ability. The pigmentation of these animals must go through extreme change to achieve this. Again, I was thinking that it was camouflage like pigmentation, but we see it's the creature's hair, and I don't know if hair can, alter its pigmentation that rapidly, especially to such fine detail, because even your cephalopods, who do alter their pigmentation, such as Cuttlefish and Octopoda that we mentioned before, do have limitations to how detailed their patterns can be. Remember, it's limited to the size of the actual, the actual cells that are undergoing the change. So that kind of resolution that we see with the demiguise over here, where we don't see it at all, doesn't make sense unless it's on a literal, near to atom size that it's changing. So I don't know. It's magic. That's kind of what it comes down to. Magic is actually very difficult to justify, and I had been trying to figure out how to do it for the sake of one of the subscribers and only person on Patreon who wanted me to do fairies. But again, magic is so difficult to figure out, and I'm wondering whether I should actually even use the fairies to focus on magic at all, because the way I had been planning it was that the universe is a closed system of energy, and that all that magic is essentially is adding energy apropos of nothing to that system. But how that would result in this kind of alteration is beyond me. So, yeah. Moving on though, we see that, again, it looks very sloth-like. And this is the hair that I was talking about. I don't know if the hair can change colors. Oh, well, the hair of a creature can change colors that quickly. I mean, obviously, hair does change color. People get old and go white, and, you can dye your hair, etc. But it's retaining color because it's just a bunch of protein. It's keratin. It would actually need to have either very, I wonder if there could be a system where the hair suddenly adopts an array of patterns depending on what the creature needs. Oh, good grief, that was a lot of plosives. And sort of like a straw drawing up the melanin as it so needs. Though I think that melanin is a little bit limited in the colors that it can create. So it would have to be some other chemical, because what does cephalopods use? Chromatophores, don't they? I forgot the name for what they use. Let me just check very, very quickly. As cephalopod chromatophore. Yeah, chromatophores. So I'm going to quickly switch this to the browser screen again, and there we go. Chromatophores, pigment containing light reflecting cells. So, let's try take a closer look at the images, because they're a lot more interesting to take a look at. So here we see, this is a cuttlefish, it looks like. Wait, let me read over here. Okay, no, it doesn't say. But the creature uses a combination of chromatophores, as we see in the central image, and also its own body shifting shape to hide in the coral. So, there's layers to its disguise as well, whereas the demiguise is just standing around. Yeah, it's just standing around. So that's a thing. Let's take a look at a larger representation. Oh, that's forbidden. Lovely. Okay, let's just zoom in over here, or maybe this one is easier. There we go. So here's a chromatophore. We've got the pigment in the center. Yay. And this is actually quite a complex cell. With the nucleus off to the side, primary enfolding pouches. You know what? I actually should have looked this up beforehand. Looking at this, radial muscle fibers. Okay, so basically, from what I can see here, just from a glance, the muscle fibers they've got radial muscle fibers down the side here, and these seem to be directly pulling on this large vacuole, this haptosome in the center of the creature's cell, and I assume that controls the density of the pigment, and then as the pigment goes more dense, you get one color, and as it becomes less dense, you get another color. Obviously, then this would control how the creature appears. And it's actually a very, very complex little collection of cells. I'm quite surprised. Wow, you learn something new every day. Because I never before thought that I would be this interested in looking at, chromatophores. Yay! So thank you so much, guys. Cuttlefish, cute fish. Yes. It is actually quite cute. You missed the octopus that we were looking at earlier. It had a tiny little hat. It was deliciously cute. And I say that not wanting to eat it. I think scientists have created materials that can reflect light in specific materials. Can I send you a link? Yeah, please do go ahead. Send me whatever links that you want through the chat. I don't know if I actually have to allow links to be sent through the chat, but I haven't actually looked at a lot of the chat features in a while, so do try. But if not, I think that what you might be talking about is metamaterials. Metamaterials. I had let me just make sure that everything's okay over there. Okay, yeah. I had a lot of encounters visiting universities and whatnot all over the place with people who actually do this kind of stuff for a living. I met an Italian gentleman 2 or 3 years ago whose speciality was producing metamaterials. The idea of a metamaterial is that, let's get a closer picture. Okay, I don't know. I want to get a larger picture, but okay. Anyway, the idea of a metamaterial is that you're creating sort of a pattern that's very, very small that affects a wave passing over the material in some way. So, for example, if you've got light, which is a wave, passing over the material, it then would bend away from that material and you would get a kind of invisibility. However, this is passive. I don't think you can turn it off, although I suppose with an electrical current changing the shape of the array, that's what it's called, an array of patterns here. This is an array. You could probably turn it on or turn it off. I can't remember exactly the details of how this went because my Italian is very bad, and the conversation was had in like broken Italian and broken English, so I couldn't really pay that much attention. But nevertheless, this is what I discovered. I also know that sometimes people do use projectors. Recording devices on one end of the object is projecting what it sees onto the other side of the object, creating a sort of invisibility. Whereas the metamaterials, though, are more general. They're used to deflect waves in general. I remember that there was a type of paint that the gentleman with whom I was speaking, was working on, that was supposed to make buildings a little bit more bomb resistant. And I was looking at some of the data that he was working with, and okay, there's only so much that you can do to prevent a bomb from destroying a wall, but considering the differences that I noticed, just from paint, that was really good. So, metamaterials. Excuse me again. Apologies to anybody wearing headphones. And yeah, that's metamaterials for you. I wonder metamaterials invisibility. Okay, I'm being an idiot with my spelling today. So here we go. General explanation of this. They've got a normal image here in the top section where light microwave source. So this is very, very long light, mind you, bouncing off a solid object, and then you can see the solid object. But here they've created a metamaterial in the bottom section, and they've placed it around the solid object, and it's bending the light away from the object so you cannot see it. So again, this is theoretical, but it's still something that is hypothetically possible. Oh, and here we've got some kind of image. I don't know, that could just be simple refraction. Oh, here's an invisible car. I wonder if this isn't that kind of projection that I was talking about. It says metamaterials, but this is by wordpress.com, so it's obviously just for show. And this is a person wearing what looks to be a green screen. So, whatever. The point is that this is a thing that is hypothetically possible, but I just want to draw attention to the fact that these are microwaves. So microwaves are measured, I think, in meters. I think microwaves are measured in meters, or centimeters even. So this is a very large wave of light, very, very large wave of light. When we're talking about things like visible light, it's a lot smaller, and therefore I imagine a lot more difficult to bend. Also, that would mean that the demiguise is actually electrically active, so that could be a thing. Quick question: what animal is the mascot of your channel? It's a dog. The dog is the mascot. It says moon chicken, but the actual animal is a dog. I'm going to quickly go back to the topic screen as I explain a little bit more about the dog. It comes from, well, my dog. His name is Munchkin, and I'm sure you can almost immediately hear the moon chicken from their Munchkin, moon chicken. So his nickname became Moon Chicken, and then yeah, that became the channel. It's a bit of a strange thing. It's actually a long-haired dachshund, so that is what my dear little munchkin is. Why did we call a dog munchkin? Because, well, that's a dog for you, love, etc. Anyway, so that was an interesting look into invisible stuff. And here we go. Finally, we can see that it resembles a sloth. But I also thought that perhaps that the demigods did look a little bit like an orangutan. So that's also one of the other things that I wanted to consider. Especially if we go back, the pattern of hair growth does seem quite similar to the orangutan, but I thought that the moss that generally tends to grow on the sloths was reminiscent of the invisibility that the demiguise engages in. So, phew. That's a fun effect, isn't it? I wish that it would go left to right, but alas, it doesn't. Next, a fun creature. Wow. Let's go to the strange beast under the lake. Ooh, I wonder what this could be. Probably something that's very dead, because it is winter and it is walking under the water. But, as we will see shortly, that's not necessarily the case. What's interesting to me, first of all, is that this creature actually defrosts some of the ice around the water there. So, Playlet's body heat is quite high, despite the fact that the lake is ostensibly frozen. So that was one of the things. Just curious, there's a lot of strange Polish lore in the Witcher video game series. Have you played it? What are your impressions on the game series and the lore in it? Actually, not only have I played the game, I have read the books. The book series is not that good. I don't recommend it, except for the first one. The first one, entitled The Last Wish, is very, very, very good. I highly, highly, highly recommend that, especially if you're interested in sort of like a... How could I explain? I don't want to say dark fantasy universe because that's such an overused trope, but the just fun fantasies, fun and interesting takes. One of the stories that comes to mind is a story where Geralt comes across a house in the middle of the woods, and it's basically Beauty and the Beast. And what happens in this house, if I recall, he meets a guy that was cursed by a priest. The guy's house becomes all magical and whatnot, and the guy actually falls in love with a vampire, despite the fact that the vampire is sort of a subhuman humanoid kind of creature. I can't remember. I think it was a Rizalka that the guy falls in love with, and it's sort of by ways and means established that a Rizalka is just not capable of love, but nevertheless, the Rizalka does love him, and he transforms back into a normal human being. Although the Rizalka dies, if I recall. And oh, sorry, spoilers. Either way, it's a very good series, and that's not the only not good series. It's a very good book. So, and that's not the only story. So I haven't spoiled anything. It's a collection of short stories. Very, very interesting. I highly recommend it. As for the series of video games, they're also very good. I enjoyed a lot of the lore and the myth in that, especially the fact that we get a lot of Tolkien-esque kind of fantasies these days. Yeah. Elves and dwarves and dragons, etc., etc. Whereas these things, the way they're presented in the Witcher series, seems more natural. Obviously, the most recent game in the series, Witcher 3, which if you watch one of my podcasts, podcast video thingies, you'll see me playing a very buggy version of The Witcher 3 that followed me all the way from South Africa, that I sort of, because Good Old Games allows you to... doesn't have DRM, I was able to put it on my hard drive because I wasn't sure whether I was going to have an internet connection when I arrived in Japan, and I really wanted to play it. And so it got ported to a portable hard drive and then to the laptop upon which I am speaking to you now. So, yeah. And it was actually quite nice. You can go watch me falling through the world in that video. I think it was the first Codcast, so do go and enjoy. I remember that. I think it's related to the Jin quest in the game. Yes, in the third game, the Jin quest with Yennefer, that is actually the end point of their relationship, because in the original Last Wish book, again, spoilers for the next however long, I don't know how to communicate that there's no. Okay, I'll write it in the chat. So spoilers until I write it in the chat. Um, at the end of the book, Yennefer has sort of hunted down a Jinn, because Jinns are like primordial power creature thingies, and she wants to try and control it. However, things go awry, and Geralt is given the final wish that the Jinn can grant, and he sort of words it weirdly, because the Jinn wants to kill Yennefer, and he says something like, "I want her to be with me forever," or something along those lines, and artificially through the Jinn they're made to love each other. And that's why the story in the game, that end of the Jinn quest, was actually very poignant, because it showed that although they were brought together by magical, artificial means, they nevertheless grew to love each other. And I thought that that was a very nice end to that plot line, because obviously this wasn't resolved in the book series. The book series is mostly focused on Ciri, which was a bit disappointing. I thought that there was a lot to this world that the writer could have explored. I forget how to pronounce his name, Andrei Saweski or something like that. And he just sort of neglected it. So the video game series, I think, is an order of magnitude better than the original books. Although there is one lore thing that they get wrong in the books. Hang on, let me actually write spoilers over. Spoilers over. Spoilers over. There we go. There is one lore problem in the game that the books don't. Well, that the books clarify. I remember at the end of the first game, Geralt takes the silver sword and is about to kill the antagonist. And the antagonist mentions that sword, the silver sword, is for monsters. And then Geralt stabs him and says, "Of course it is." In the most obvious, non-poetic, poetic destroying way possible. But actually, in the books, in fact, I think in The Last Wish, it mentions both swords, the steel sword and the silver sword, are for monsters. Just some monsters are magical, others are not. So, ostensibly, Geralt is always killing monsters, human or otherwise. And in the game series, they say steel for. In fact, in the soundtrack of the video game series, there's a song called "Silver for Monsters" and another song called "Steel for Humans," which is lore-wise that is incorrect. So yeah. And don't worry about distracting the stream. This is. I'm allowing myself to get off track because, well, it's fun, and I hope people can enjoy it, and that's kind of the whole point. You're supposed to enjoy this. You like the part with Geralt and Ciri in The Last Wish? Yes, that was actually, they have a very weird relationship, Geralt and Ciri, because ostensibly he's her father, because he kind of owns her through a deal that he made with. I can't remember the details. It's been a while since I've read the book, so I can't discuss it in any specifics as such, but. Any specifics that I neglected to, in detail, take note of. But yeah, it was actually quite poignant. Sorry, Sazal. Yes, you are the only one who has no idea. It would appear. I'm going to quickly. Okay, tell you what. Well, I'll make a note quickly about the Dark Souls stuff, because I don't want to leave other people out of the discussion. And let's quickly go back to the Rumfit. Then between the Rumfit, I will go to Dark Souls. So yeah, after the Rumfit, I'll go to Dark Souls. And yes, this was, sorry again for nerding out there a little bit, Sithal, or anybody listening who has no interest whatsoever in the Witcher series. I'll pull up some screens for you when we're done with the Rumfit. So again, we've got this giant beast walking under the ice. And wow, it turns out to be a hippo rhino. Yay. What magic. I really enjoyed how they made it appear to be quite rhinoceros-like. I'm not exactly how to make an adjective of that. Going back to the image, the horn and the large explosive venom bulb that it has. Quite an interesting take on it. However, look at that face. I specifically chose this image because this is the look that the Rumpet gives Kowalski before pouncing on him. I say pouncing with inverted commas there because we all know what happened, and that expression is just like, "Come to me, big boy." So quite lovely. But it also resembles most hippos. If we look at the face of this hippo here, that's a pretty "come to me, big boy" face. Rhinos are incredibly dangerous, but they're very friendly. Hippos are incredibly dangerous, but they're not very friendly. It's I generally recommend that you avoid mucking about with hippos. There's quite a few hippo attacks back home, especially up in Limpopo, where it's sort of like the untamed wild of South Africa, and these creatures are absolutely terrifying. If ever you see a hippo in the wild, run away. Don't try and touch it. Don't go anywhere near it. Just run away. You might know from Egypt, where they actually had lots of hippos in the Nile River, and how dangerous they are. Yeah, I don't know what I was going to say with that sentence, but that was a thing. I don't think hippos can drink an entire pond. No, it's that sounds like a bit of an exaggeration, but they are quite dangerous. So again, and also quite monumentally fat. Though I suppose that's the natural physiology for a hippo, so I don't know if we can call it fat because, that's what it's supposed to look like. But anyway, so we see over here it's actually quite playful, which does remind me of rhinos. Rhinos are like big dogs. Really and truly they are. Again, as I say, they are dangerous, so don't, if you see one in the wild, don't go anywhere near them. But they're very, yes, behemoth. Oh, good boy. I was actually going to mention that. The rhinos are actually very, very friendly and very playful, and we see her over here just rolling about, having fun. It's actually very, very cute and very sweet. I rather enjoy this scene. It makes me all the more sad because rhinos are becoming, a little extinct. Meanwhile, they're just full of love. Really, as wild animals that are untamed go, rhinos are very docile creatures. Blind as a bat, absolutely blind as a bat. They cannot see for anything, but they're very cute and very sweet. So, rhinos deserve love too. And ironic that you're saying that you wonder how they taste, because especially after Sithal mentions behemoth, because if we all recall from the behemoth video, the behemoth is supposed to be eaten. I don't think hippos would taste very nice, though. I imagine that their meat is quite blubbery. And, I probably like whale. Where I live in Japan is actually very close to the whale hunting areas. So, occasionally the restaurants will have whale meat. But because I neither agree nor disagree, I'm still on the fence about whether hunting whales is something we ought to do. I haven't actually brought myself to try it, but a lot of the people with whom I work actually have eaten whale meat, and sometimes I will make jokes about eating things like, "Oh, do you eat spiders?" or whatever. And then, apropos of nothing, one day I said, "Oh, how about whales?" And they were like, "Yes." And I thought, my God, oh, I forgot, I'm in Japan, like one of the only two places left on Earth where whales are consumed. So, yeah. And you're wondering what humans taste like. Ostensibly, we taste like pork because we're very salty. Although, considering that Kwazu is cooking, maybe we could interrupt the chicken cooking and quickly flop a leg on there, a human leg. So porky humans. Technically speaking, though, in all of us, we have the capacity to want to eat another human being. Hippos look like leaner pigs. Hippos look like leaner pigs. Sorry, for some reason it hid your message. about leaner pigs. So I don't know why I did that, but that's a filter for you. Anyway, um, ostensibly, we all have within us the capacity to want to eat other human beings. Think about plane crashes or sports teams, the stereotypical sports team that ends up stuck in the mountains, that then is forced to eat the dead people to survive. And neuropsychologically speaking, reproduction, the desire for reproduction, from whence the desire for maintaining a society arises, actually comes later than our desire to make sure that we survive. So, ostensibly, we could argue that it's in our nature to eat each other. Consider the cannibal tribes in New Guinea, where due to a lack of protein, they actually consumed people that other tribes that they had beaten. And this is where they got the gosh, I wrote a laughing disease, a type of prion disease from eating each other. So this stream took a very dark turn. So yeah, and hippos look like leaner pigs, but larger. You know, I'm not sure what a leaner pig looks like, but I'll take your word for it. I imagine that they're also probably quite salty. A lot of animals do taste very similar. The only difference that I've found when eating a lot of animals is that sometimes they're a little bit more bitter, and sometimes they're a little bit more sweet. And that's really the only difference in my experience. During the horse meat crisis in the UK, sometime around 2009, I think about 1/10 of the population admitted to wanting to try human meat. Huh, that's interesting. That's very interesting. Horse meat is okay, I'll say, just for the record, because I unfortunately had the opportunity, well, not the opportunity, the experience of consuming horse meat and didn't know it at the time, and, well, it was okay, so I'll say that. But 1/10 of the population admitting to want to try human meat? Huh. That's actually quite dangerous. I wouldn't want to eat another human being because just the diseases that you would get. As I mentioned with the laughing disease in New Guinea, you can easily get prion diseases. You can get any kind of virus. It's not a good idea to eat another human being. And not to mention, we already have problems with night soil, using human excrement to fertilize gardens and farms, etc. You really should wash your vegetables, don't forget. I can only imagine that it would get a lot worse if you were to eat people. Back home, there was actually a woman, I think about, back home, I mean, in South Africa, there was a woman about 2 blocks away from where I lived who actually had Creutzfeldt-Jacobs disease. So, just eating a random person, especially when prion diseases don't show any symptoms until like really late on, is not a good idea. Yes, it is an understatement. Oh yeah, apropos of Japan, I mentioned you, or maybe watch too much Tokyo Ghoul. Ah, yes. Ironic that I would be in Japan talking about eating human beings, and Tokyo Ghoul is a thing. Um, yes, maybe. Oh, well, you could be the neighbor, by the way, Kwazu. Uh, you could be the one wondering what human beings taste like. I mean, you're kind of wondering it now, aren't you? Especially since we brought it up. There's now at least one, two, three, four, including myself, people wondering what human beings taste like in the world. So, thank you so much, Senthal. That was amazing of you. And yes, probably watching too much Tokyo Ghoul. I won't go into too much anime because that can, like with the Witcher series, that can spiral out of control very quickly. Anyway, going back to the Rumpet. This is very interesting. I wonder what that chemical is because it disintegrates a tree. I looked at the wiki for, and in fact, I'm going to quickly pull it up, so don't mind my clicking, please. I looked at the wiki, and apparently this is some kind of explosive liquid. Now, again, as I said, the wiki for the Fantastic Beasts series is it is very, 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 very hyperbolic to the point that I wouldn't actually trust it about anything. But whatever, it's the only thing that we actually have to use at this point. So let's quickly plonk over to the browser screen, and here we go. So it says that the It resembles a rhinoceros with a roundish body. Rampant did not attack unless provoked. Okay. The horn could pierce skin and metal, and the horn contained a deadly fluid that caused whatever was injected with it to explode. Now, again, it says explode, but we see the tree disintegrating. So I suppose because trees are very hard and cytoplasm is very... Not cytoplasm, sorry. What was the word? Phloem is very difficult to destroy. That's why it disintegrated here. But it still seems quite interesting to me as, just that this would evolve naturally. Some kind of, a massive hyperdome. You would think that the horn on its own would be sufficiently dangerous enough to, save the creature from basically anything. But nevertheless, here we have a situation where an animal has decided that a huge-ass horn is not sufficient enough to keep it protected. So I wonder what is trying to eat the Rampart on a regular basis that it would have to evolve this kind of defensive measure. A defensive measure that, again, destroys trees. So, yeah. And clearly this isn't a very expensive fluid for the creature to produce. I mentioned in the... what was it? One of the videos, I mentioned that venom is actually quite... creatures' venom is actually quite metabolically expensive to produce. And that creatures don't like to use their venom if they can at all avoid it. But this creature is using it to get to something that is clearly not a mate, or, well, I mean, obviously it thinks that he is, but it has the eyes of a rhino, so it can't really tell. But it's using it to destroy a tree. So, and it's also got quite a large amount of it, so, I don't know. Let's quickly go back up here. Take a look at its glowing head. It's a very weird thing for this creature to have evolved. So I'm thinking that it must have been dealing with dragons or something like that. Maybe some kind of horrific giant monster. They also mentioned, by the way, that it looks like a hippopotamus over here. So yeah, that's quite interesting, isn't it? Don't be sorry, Sathal. You're absolutely able to say or distract me as you will. I'm allowing myself to be distracted. I don't think the mating thing is right, though. I'm sorry to distract you again, but I'm really curious as to its relation to the Triceratops. It seems as though these types of creatures related to heavy mass-based creatures like rhinoceros, because that wouldn't make sense in a species of reproductive success. The fluid reminds me of Bombardier. Actually, I was about to talk about Bombardier Beetles that have a set of fluids, a pair of fluids that sort of combust, or they become really hot when they come in contact with one another, and the beetle then sprays this at other creatures. Actually, let's look up the Bombardier Beetles, and I will also quickly take a look at the Triceratops stuff. So Bombardier Beetles, there we go. Bombardier Beetles. So, there we go, Bombardier Beetle. And that's a lovely gif. Wow, what good fortune. So here the beetle is being held by some kind of forceps, and they're actively trying to get it to spray its rather noxious liquid at someone, well, at the thing. And as I mentioned, it uses a set of liquids. As we can see here, they're hydrogen peroxide and hydroquinone in the one gland, and they meet together in a very similar fashion as to liquid rockets, that we use for going into space, and yeah, explosive gas. Quite fun, isn't it? So I was going to say it's probably something along these lines, but we don't see it it doesn't combust immediately upon coming into contact with one another, whereas if you look at the design here of the Bombardier Beetle's abdomen, let's zoom in, the liquids only make contact outside of the creature. They don't make contact within the creature. And if we look at the Rampart, clearly this bulb is containing some kind of liquid, but we never actually see a point where it is, where is the contact point? So I wonder if this is, activated upon exposure to oxygen or something along those lines, because it doesn't immediately explode as soon as it leaves the horn. And again, it's just a really weird adaptation. Interesting, but weird adaptation. So yeah. Um, so yeah, let's go back to quickly the chat. Because that wouldn't make sense in a species reproductive success. Lols, we have an insect that explodes their enemies. That's cool. Kind of explodes. It's actually just, it burns a lot from what I understand, but I don't know if it explodes them. Um, and yes, it was a Basilisk video where I mentioned that. Sorry, I'm reading like up and down, up and down, up and down. I'm not finishing whole sentences. It's rather bad of me. Um, Back to the Triceratops. And this is something that I actually want to mention. I did talk about this partially in the unicorn video, where the Triceratops, the Triceratops' horn specifically, if we look at this, it's not a normal horn in what we would see in modern times, because it's entirely bone. Modern creatures have horns that are made out of hair, and while they do have a small nub upon which the horn eventually does grow, in most cases it's nowhere near as large as this creature's horns. So either the Triceratops, having these large bony nubs, had bony horns, or there was a filament-based horn, hair-based horn that grew on top of that. I wouldn't say that the Erumphet is in any way related to the dinosaurs, mostly because I'm assuming that the Erumphet is a mammal, and the dinosaurs were not mammals. They're, completely separate. However, again, metabolically, I think that they were very similar to birds, but yeah. However, there is the chance that something like this could have evolved again in the Erumphet. I'm considering here the venom of the snake. Let me just quickly go to snake and spitting cobra. Let's go spitting cobra. And I'm thinking that let's see if I can find a diagram. Spitting cobra, here we go. I'm thinking that it might work similar to this if it were a bone, where we actually have a funnel in the actual tooth that directs the venom. And interestingly enough, we can see the angles out of which the venom is injected. I mostly chose a spitting cobra just because there was a good chance that we would find the venom sacs being displayed. So it could well be a bone, it could be a hair fiber thingy, but I'm not entirely sure. Again, this is imaginary, so whatever we want, eh? Whatever we want. Dinosaurs are non-avian birds. Oh my god, they're forgetting the feathers at the end of the tail. I think that in the last stream that we did, we had the theropods being mentioned. That was those dinosaurs were very similar to birds. I'm not sure as to the metabolism of something like the Triceratops or any of the sauropods, etc. So, and again, I'm speaking metabolically here. So take what I say with a pinch of salt, etc. Anyway, so let's go back. We were sitting here staring at the tree getting exploded, and this was the bag part that I mentioned before. So here we've got this bag that is incredibly small, yet it's very clearly sucking in this creature. It's actively pulling the creature in. It's not like the creature has to go in on its own accord. It actually gets pulled in. Whereas Kowalski, in trying to get into the bag, got stuck. So what is happening? I'm going to quickly go back to the bag, and I want to actually show you what I'm talking about over here. So again, he is stuck. He's not actually changing in size, and he's having to force himself in. Whereas with the this little Erumpet thing that is so delicious and fun. It's getting pulled in. How does this work? I wonder. Anyway, that's just a side note. And there we go, the Erumpet's done. Now, as I said, I would very briefly take a look at the Dark Souls thing. Where was that? Sorry to distract you, but Dark Souls. Have you watched VartiVideo's series on Dark Souls? It's really good. I have watched VartiVideo's series on Dark Souls, but I haven't watched it in a while. So I'm not actually up to date with some of his theories. This was when I was playing Dark Souls a long time ago. I originally started playing the Soul series with Demon Souls. There was one copy at the local game store, and I was interested in the control mechanics because I saw it won an award. And the lore in Demon Souls was actually quite interesting, but there was nobody to talk about it, so I wanted Varti to discuss Demon Souls, but yeah. Although that's not related to creatures or Harry Potter in any way, it's still an interesting thing. I recommend anybody who really wants to take a look at lore stuff, look at VartiVideo's Dark Souls series. It helps if you do play the game. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but it's really nice. I highly recommend it. Very briefly, since I mentioned going to Witcher, let's look up the Witcher 3. There we go. The Witcher 3. Yay! There's Geralt. So Thal, this is what we were talking about. We were talking about this open world role-playing game based on a series of books by a Polish guy. Generally, it's like high fantasy set in, I suppose, not medieval Europe, but Middle Ages Europe kind of setting. It's highly implied that at some point in our current century, there was some kind of event that caused a whole bunch of human beings to teleport to this fantasy world, and then we just sort of carried on from there. And well, yeah, that's the series. Here is the individual about whom we were speaking, Ciri, Geralt's daughter. Not really his daughter, he is infertile, but basically his daughter, his adopted daughter, and here is Geralt hunting monsters. If you're interested in any kind of creature stuff, this is a very good series for that. Especially because, it's basically this Beastiary series that I've been doing, but as a game. I want to quickly see if I can find... there we go, Yennefer. This is Yennefer. She is the wife. I say wife in inverted commas of Geralt, just to create sort of a connection of how they meet each other up. Well, not how they meet each other. How they're related to each other. Sorry, it was a really long train ride from Osaka. So, she is a power-hungry sorceress, and through her interactions with a genie that nearly killed one of Geralt's friends, she kind of ended up getting magically falling in love with Geralt. That was a thing. So just for anybody who was wondering and thinking, oh, what the hell are these guys on about? That's that. I'm not sure on YouTube's filters about swearing, so I don't want to swear all that often, but I don't know if hell counts, but now I've said it, so yeah. His insight into the deeper meaning of Dark Souls is incredible, I think. The Witcher mentions a lot about a lot of different types of creature lore. Yes, the creature lore is absolutely astounding. Actually, in the novel series, Geralt does go into the evolution of creatures, although in his description, evolution is very, very fast, whereas in reality evolution is actually quite slow. I don't think Andre, the writer, understood entirely what he was talking about when he was talking about evolution, but he does introduce the idea of evolution into monster lore, so that's a useful thing. Again, I highly recommend that for anybody who's just interested in this kind of stuff. And you say you see a Wendigo. Yes, I think this is no, this isn't a Wendigo. This is a Griffin. There are no Wendigos in the series. Let me just see if there's a larger image. I don't want to zoom in too much. This, oh no, is that a Wendigo? I can't remember. Is that a Wendigo? It's been a while since I played the game. It might be a Wendigo. It looks like a Wendigo. I don't know. Okay, well, I'll assume that it's a Wendigo. I think there's a Wendigo in the series. Maybe. Okay, you know what? It's not that important. Let's call it a Wendigo for now. But I thought that a Wendigo was supposed to be a kind of human being, not a monster. So we'll take it as is for now. Oh yeah, it's a fiend. There we go. Thank you. Yes, that's a fiend. Not a Wendigo. Again, apologies. It's been a while since I played the games, so I can't remember exactly how they represented the things. So thank you so much. It's useful to have people who know things in the chat. Sorry that you're a little bit limited by my speed of reading and focus. Anyway, let's quickly go back to the creatures. So, just a very short mention. These are moon calves in the Harry Potter series. They're very interesting animals. And regarding the Vampire Lore video, I found Vampire Island. Look up Ern in Northern Ireland. Okay, I'll make a note of that. That's Ern Ireland. Okay, cool. So quickly, the moon calf. Very, very quickly. These creatures are basically llamas. You can't see them very well in the screenshot over here that I got. And in fact, I do, from this point, I'm going to have to apologize for the quality of the screenshots because they're... I don't want to use any moving images as such because I wasn't entirely sure on how the copyright would work. So I thought still images were my safest bet. But unfortunately, the still images are not always the clearest thing to look at. So do apologize. Anyway, going back, so it's clearly a llama in shape and size, but it has massive eyes. Wow, look at that. This thing must have a focal length of forever. Just wow. Interestingly enough, this is a nod to biological possibility because oftentimes we see that herbivores have eyes on the sides of their heads so as to increase the field of view. And, well, these creatures have massive eyes on the sides of their heads. So clearly they're looking at very, 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 very far away things in a lot of detail all around them. I don't know, though, if that would evolve like that naturally. Human beings and eagles actually have very, very good eyesight. It is absolutely ridiculously just insane how good our eyesight is. Sorry, that sentence got away from me in the middle of it. And these creatures have not only got large eyes, allowing for ostensibly a longer focal length, but they've got it on the sides of their heads, which means that, what are they looking at? And I thought there must be something in their lore, but I just couldn't find anything. So I'm imagining that they're looking out for a lot of tiny, tiny, tiny dragons or something like that. Well, I say tiny, I mean like far away. Because having such a massive focal length, but nothing upon which you can focus, because I don't know if they have any kind of decent depth perception. They're clearly capable of looking forward, but, I don't know if that's the natural state of these creatures. It seems a bit of a waste, so I don't know. They're very vulnerable and hunted by dangerous predators. Yeah, that's the best thing that I can come up with, actually, that very dangerous predators that are very fast. They would have to be very fast, I also imagine. We don't get to see this creature's brain, but a very interesting thing about the human brain is that the occipital lobe, which is predominantly for dealing with visual processing and that kind of stuff, is about 1/4 the size of our brains, which means that although we don't have eyes that are as amazing as an eagle's, our ability to understand what we're looking at and discern patterns are really, really, really good. Perhaps even better than an eagle's. And an eagle does have a large occipital lobe. In fact, let me quickly see if I can look it up on the googly goo. Eagle brain structure. So yeah, eagle. Let's see. I don't know. I can't see. Songbird, monkey. It's giving me human beings only that I could see the occipital lobe and other creatures. Yeah, it's okay. That was a. Okay, no, never mind. That's a bit disappointing. I'm waffling on. Okay, so basically the eagles have very, very good visual processing centers. I don't think as good as ours, but it is very, very large. Again, because they're looking for highly camouflaged animals in the undergrowth of bushes and all sorts of stuff like that. So naturally, you would have very good eyes. One development that they do have over us is that the veins in the retina are actually, well, the veins in the eye are behind the retina, so it doesn't interfere with their ability to see. Sometimes you might notice that you sort of see stars or white dots in your vision, especially if your blood pressure is being a bit weird. Those little white dots are actually white blood cells moving through the capillaries in your eyes. And whenever you see, what was it? You can sort of see like shadows sometimes, especially if your body temperature is quite high, sort of like bluish black shadows. That's red blood cells moving in front of your vision. And whenever we take photos of human beings, you get sort of that red eye effect. That red eye effect is, again, blood in the eye reflecting back at us, back at the camera. So, yeah. You see, I think Dave Cullen recently talked about how predators, in an evolutionary sense, are always more complex than their prey. Yes, as far as I understand the process, neurologically speaking at least, the predators do need to necessarily be more complex. Of course, that's not always the case. Consider things like parasites. I suppose a parasite isn't actually a predator as such, but generally, in the arms race of biology, the predator can only survive if it's one step ahead of the prey items. So, we need to be able to identify foodstuffs from a long range away or something like that. Be able to discern patterns in the foodstuffs. Um, and as a result, we need to be able to develop pattern recognition systems such as the brain. I'm only halfway through, I should mention, halfway through the a book by Swanson. I'm still looking at a lot of neurogenesis, so I'm not exactly sure on how the actual process works. I'll comment on it a little bit later, but from what I get is that it's this particular arms race that is causing it. This arms race of hunting and hunted. Necessarily speaking, though, if prey item evolves to outdo its predator to any kind of extreme degree, the predator will naturally go extinct. At least so the logic dictates. Yeah, make of that what you will. Um, there was one more thing that I was going to mention. Oh yeah, except that our vision was mostly human vision was mostly driven by defensive needs. Particularly, I remember there was a gentleman. I was listening to some lecture. I cannot recall exactly what it was, but the gentleman suggested that the our vision came from our need to see dangerous animals such as snakes, which were incredibly dangerous and small. That was the most redundant sentence ever. Okay, basically things like snakes, which are poisonous and very highly camouflaged. So our ability to process their camouflage, to defeat their camouflage with, computationally speaking, and also spot the creatures in the first place, had to evolve. Also, he was saying that color vision came from, I suppose, a type of hunting where we were looking at fruits in trees. So, to tell when they're ripe, and that was a sense that we were using. So, quite interesting, that. But yeah, I do actually go a little bit into the. I sort of kind of blew my load a little bit on this one, going to the focal length of the eyes and stuff about the creatures. So I'll leave it at that. To go to the next creature, which is the Alchemy. Yay, dragon thing. I think Sith, I'm getting names confused now. Sith, you mentioned this creature in the last, the last stream that I did, didn't you? Or something like it. It's that long, snake-like dragon-type creature, and this one was very interesting. First to note, ostensibly this Alchemy is belonging to Kowalski in a very avian-type way, because it saw him first when it was born, but we can clearly see it seeing Newt first here, just stuff. Anyway, so the Alchemies are these largest serpent-like creatures that live in this nest. And they also pose a bit of a logical problem with the series, and again going to the bag. The bag is the problem with this, amphitheater. Yes, that's it. Sorry, the bag is the problem with this creature and the series, this story, because here we have an Alchemy going into a building, and then, my slides are all out of order. Why did this happen? Okay. Okay, I'm going to try and make this work, even though my slides are out of order, because now my notes don't match what I'm looking at. So I'm going to have to sort of wing this one. My apologies, guys. Okay, so here we've got the Alchemy that went into this building, and we see that it gets incredibly large. Absolutely massive, in fact. They say that it takes up the entire space of whatever environment it is in. In this case, it is the attic of this shop. I don't know about the limits on this creature, but we can clearly see that here it is now an order of magnitude larger than the demi-guise, several orders of magnitude, in fact. And it's capable of destroying the environment around it at this size, so it's obviously gaining mass, which, again, it's not something that I necessarily think is reasonable, but that's what's happening over here. So it's quite a dangerous creature, and I wonder, where is this mass coming from, first of all, and secondly, when it does over here. Secondly, when it does that one, when it does go back down to its normal size, it's losing a lot of mass. So where is that going? It's possible to gain. Okay, no, it's not possible to gain volume suddenly like this, but that would have made at least a bit more sense in the case that, sort of like Ant-Man, the atoms separating further from each other. There is a limit to how far these atoms can separate, but we'll assume that, this limit is broken. But here, because it's able to destroy the environment around it, it is losing and gaining mass. Gaining, losing, gaining, losing, which is a bit odd. And again, we see that it takes up the entire space of what it is contained in, vis-a-vis the egg. But if we go back to the bag, we remember that the bag has a massive amount of space in it. Kowalski takes it out of its little nest here and holds it in the bag. What prevents this creature from occupying the entire space of the bag, assuming that this is some kind of non-Euclidean environment inside of here? Ostensibly, if it is non-Euclidean, it could potentially be infinite. So why is this creature not infinitely big inside of this bag? Why does it not occupy all the space? And more to the point, why doesn't it occupy all the space of the entire world? Why doesn't it, when it's out in the atmosphere, why doesn't it, wrap itself around the Earth? Sort of like, your Norse mythology kind of creatures. So that's just, I don't know, the Alchemy is very odd. And thank you for the compliments. I don't think this stream is very particularly good, but I tried my best, so thank you. Yeah, sorry, my notes are now all out of whack, and I'm having to read up and down, so my deepest apologies. I'm going to actually drop that and ask, what do you guys think? About the Alchemy in particular, because this is not, this creature the idea of this creature is very fun, but again, logically, it just doesn't make sense. Maybe it's tamed in some way to not kill every animal. That could be the case. We see that it actually in let's go to here. With the screenshot, you can't see it very well, but there is in fact a cockroach that is being thrown between where Kowalski was standing in the previous shot and the woman over there, Goldstein, who is attempting to catch it. So clearly the alchemy really wants to eat this tiny cockroach, despite the cockroach not actually adding in any way to its mass at this point. It's not a decent food source for something so big. So I don't know. Maybe it just is its natural prey items are insects. Again, this creature doesn't make a lot of sense, both physically and just magically within the rules of this world. It doesn't make sense. I mean, if I take it to the let's move away from the bag. If we take it to somewhere more spacious, that is visually more spacious, like the Ministry of Magic, would it then take up that entire column of buildings if it just expanded? So, yeah. I think snakes are normally representative of eternity regarding the snake eating its own tail type of thing. Yeah, the Caduceus is it's a Caduceus, isn't it? No, that's the Caduceus was the Caduceus was the medical thing, wasn't it? Or Ouroboros, that's it. The Ouroboros is the snake eating its tail. I'm terrible for memory today. And yeah, I suppose that does represent eternity, but I thought that the Ouroboros represented eternity more in the fact that it was a circle. There's no end to the circle, and not so much that it was a snake, but it could be. This creature gets its name from Occam's razor for some reason. That's at least what the wiki says. So I'm not sure. It doesn't make sense, but it is a fun creature. Also in Norse mythology, the creature is called Jormungandr. I could never pronounce it. Jormungandr. 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 Okay, whatever. Pretend that I pronounced that correctly and praise me for it in your own small way, for pronouncing such a weirdly spelled word. And yes, I forget the Norse mythology stuff quite a lot. I'm actually quite terrible for it. And I probably look like a bit of an idiot, but I'm also okay with that. I accept my idiocy. It's something that we can share together. Anyway, because my notes are my notes are all wonky for this now, let's just quickly go over to the Swooping Evil. Yay! This creature was particularly difficult to take photos of. Well, take screenshots of, because all of its scenes, it's moving very, very quickly. And again, like the alchemy, it is small when Newt holds it, and he holds it like a sort of a yo-yo thing, because they really wanted to do up the 3D effects in the film, but whatever. But it actually looks quite terrifying. That looks like a skull, and it's in the scene. When I first saw the scene, I thought, "Oh dear Lord, it's actually eating that man's brain," and this is supposed to be a children's movie. But Newt does yell out, "Leave that guy's brain alone," so it becomes a little bit more palatable, I guess, in that sense. However, again, this is absolutely terrifying. I think it depends on the mythology. Eastern mythology focuses more on recurring cycles. Western mythology, yeah, actually, I did want to do a video about the differences in types of mythology, because for the most part in the videos that I'd been doing, I'd been focusing on convergent ideas rather than any kind of overarching theme. And I thought that would be a very nice, how could I say, a nice sort of tie-in for all of the creatures that I've been doing. So I'm now stuttering like a weirdo. But it's a very big topic. It would be easier for me to write a book, to be honest, rather than do a video. But yeah, as needs must. Alas, I'm far too busy to sit down and write a book. So I could try. You know what? I'll try. I'll try and simplify it. Yeah. It sounds like the same, but I think there are differences, especially relating to political cycles. Yeah, political cycles. I've been doing a lot of politics lately, A book that I highly recommend for you guys is Why Nations Fail. It is a little bit long though, but anyway, again we're getting a little off topic. As fun as the off topic is, I probably should do an off topic stream sometime. It's the discussions. I notice a lot of people do tend to enjoy random discussion streams on YouTube. So maybe since we keep going off topic, maybe that's something you guys would be interested in. And yeah, Chairman Mao. Ugh. Let's not get into communism just yet. That would be a that's like an entire series of videos, and I think there's channels on YouTube that discuss that already. Anyway, obviously the swooping evil is a type of bat. They say that it specifically comes from Africa. I've never seen anything like that in Africa, but whatever. It eats brains. Bats usually don't eat brains. That's a big difference. What was interesting to me is that we see that the bats, plant-like. I was actually about to mention that the bat is quite membranous and actually very fluffy, and in most places I imagine is quite cute. Whereas this creature, that looks like a carapace of some kind. And I was wondering, what on earth is this exactly? Because it does move like a bat, it swoops like a bat and everything, but this is clearly not a bat. And it balls up and, well, it sort of, unfortunately I couldn't get a really good screenshot of it, even though there were many opportunities in the film, but it sort of makes a little ball for itself, and hangs upside down like a bat, moving towards the source of gravity. I think I might be able to, if I look at the wiki page, it might show us a little bit more about yes, there we go. Okay, so we're going to quickly transition over to the wiki page. We do everything quickly on this channel, you see. And there is the Swooping Evil, a very colorful butterfly-like creature from a tiny ball thing. That green ball next to the side actually fits in Newt's hand, so this creature is also opening up quite a lot. Now, I think that it is not unreasonable to assume that this creature does in fact, naturally spread out like this. It could just be very, very light. But it is also incredibly strong. And this is where my main apology comes from for not having captured any kind of moving images, because we see in the, let me just quickly go back to it. We see in the video, the movie, Goldstein actually jumps on this creature to cross a death pit, and I couldn't get a decent shot of it, and so I'm very embarrassed at showing you guys this, and I was still debating even up until 5 seconds ago whether I should, but this is an image of Goldstein jumping off of the Swooping Evil. That is as clear as I could get it, even after doing a little bit of touching up in Photoshop. So, yes, it's really strong. It's small and ostensibly light, but really powerful. I mean, that's generating a lot of upward force to be able to take a human being who is jumping on it and also then allow them to push off of it. It's a really strong creature. I would not want to mess around with this. There is a reason why this creature is able to knock down a human being like this, just completely unconscious. This thing is incredibly powerful, and I think that is one of the main themes in this particular film. These creatures are really, really strong. Again, referencing Nif Ler. Wow. Just absolutely wow. Either that or the people who made the film don't know how much force it takes to deal with a lot of these things. I doubt many people have actually picked up a gold brick, in reference to Nif Ler. I certainly haven't. I've tried. I've never managed it. And I mean not like a gold plate, like an actual about a liter of gold. So maybe it's related to bat type creatures in Dead Space. They represent infection. They move around in the dark, tight spaces, spread disease fast. Ebola is actually a very, very big problem. I remember before coming to Japan, there was, now I don't watch a lot of television, but people I know watch television, and I came across an advert, a public service announcement that people should not eat bats because you may catch Ebola or some other horrible disease. And my first thought was, who the hell is eating bats? And then my second thought was rural people, of course, because, sometimes food is hard to come by. But bats tend to spread rabies, especially vampire bats. It's quite a big problem. They're not. I don't think that bats are traditionally thought of as a symbol of disease, though, but they really ought to be because, my word, they're filthy animals. And the problem with bats in particular is that if they bite you, you don't notice it. It feels like a mosquito bite and looks like a sort of, okay. It doesn't. How can I describe this? Because my adjectives, okay, it's not exactly like a mosquito bite, but there is a good chance that you can just ignore the bite and say, oh, just some welt or something, or maybe I scratched myself. And in some cases, depending on how the animal bit you, it can definitely look like an insect bite. Meanwhile, you have rabies. And the problem with rabies is that the moment it starts showing symptoms, you're in trouble. So the moment you notice that there are bats in your area, particularly vampire bats, you have to be very careful with rabies. You can't just ignore it. I remember a friend of mine actually found bats in their basement type of thing. Basements are not very common back home, but this friend had bats, and they weren't entirely sure whether the bats had bitten them. So they had to go to animal control to have the bats removed, and then had to start taking medication to try and deal with the potential rabies that they might have had. They were particularly worried that their dog had rabies because, unfortunately, the only way that we had at that time, and I think there's still the main way to detect rabies. In fact, the only way to detect rabies is to cut open the brain of an animal that you suspect is infected to see if that is in fact rabies. Of course, if you love your dog and you want to see if they have rabies, cutting open its brain is not necessarily the best way to, keep it alive. So you kind of have this weird problem where your dog might have rabies and you too may have rabies, but you can't really tell. I think that you can look for viral RNA patterns because I remember when having to study virology, there are methods to look for viral RNA in the blood, but that's not something that's a bit of a luxury. It's not something that we had in Africa very easily. So yeah, although I'm not sure if rabies shows up in a viral RNA test. So make of that what you will, because I think it's like malaria, sort of a parasite. So, but anyway, that's beside the point. A very interesting and heartfelt story from Africa, deepest, darkest Africa. Yeah, although in your own countries, no matter where you may be living, that is certainly something that you should keep an eye open for. So beware of bats. That was a very waffly story. I really should waffle less, but waffling is fun. Anyway, on to the saddest creature in the series, the Grap Horn. The Grap Horn is supposed to be similar to a unicorn kind of thing. This is when I was actually taking screen caps for this film, I labeled this as Cthulhu Horse because just, Cthulhu Horse. Although technically we don't actually know what Cthulhu looks like. If you look at the books, it's not very well described, but modern idea of Cthulhu. So if anybody starts yelling me at like, oh no, it's not Cthulhu, blah, 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 I know, but modern depictions of Cthulhu. This creature is very interesting. It has a horn made out of gold. So it's very similar to a unicorn, in fact, except, the terrifying Cthulhu nature of it. However, what makes it more interesting is that there are only... Oh no, what happened there? Oh dear. Oh dear, my images were wonky. Let's go over there. There are only two of them in the entire world, so let's go back here. There were only two of them in the entire world that Newt had saved. And I thought, wow, this species is absolutely, completely screwed. because they do not have the genetic diversity to repopulate. Unless they have got some magic way of improving genetic diversity, they're buggered. Now, a thing that I did not suspect would happen was that these images would not show up on the uh, video feed here, but if you look over here, this is the only one that's actually showing up very nicely. I should have actually run through the stream beforehand. I am a moron. Run through the stream entirely beforehand. I am a moron. I had an example of how speciation occurs and also how genetic diversity can be affected. In this image that you're looking at now, we have the population of some arbitrary group of animals. Then they have what is called a bottlenecking event. The bottlenecking event could be anything like a disease outbreak or hunting, etc. But what this does is it reduces the genetic diversity in the population of that creature. This then affects something that is called the minimum viable population. Now, I will say that the minimum viable population is not a fixed number. And when you go online and you look for minimum viable population, you will see wildly different numbers for all kinds of species. For example, I've seen with a very selective breeding program, human beings have a minimum viable population of 60 something individuals, whereas rhinos have something along the lines of more like 20 individuals. Ostensibly, we experienced a bottlenecking event in our recent past, which is why our minimum viable population is so high. And this Grap Horn creature is now, well, there's only two left, so I don't know how it's supposed to survive. I did see a few things on trying to breed endangered species like to a decent population size, but apparently this was quite difficult, and again the numbers for what the minimum viable population ought to be is always weird. But this is something that I did want to mention, and just as an aside for the poor Cthulhu Horse, because it is something that we don't often consider with animal conservation. Just because you've saved an animal, and we're going to get to that now as well with the Thunderbird, just because you've saved an animal doesn't necessarily mean that its entire species is saved. We often see in cartoons and various other comedic media that somebody, shot the last female of whatever species, or the last male of whatever species, or something like that, to show that the character is quite vindictive or something along those lines. But actually, if that was the last male or last female of the species is kind of screwed as it is. So, yeah, just an interesting point. Sorry, I didn't check the chat for the Swooping Evil. They said, move around in dark, tight spaces, spread disease fast. Oh yeah, I talked about rabies. That animal might be an ambush predator because of its appearance. Considering it's supposed to be an African animal, I assume Central African is what they were talking about. The jungles in the Congo are quite green. Going back to the Swooping Evil, sorry everyone listening. They're quite green, and I imagine something like that wouldn't go amiss. Well, would go amiss in the jungle, especially since it's knocking human beings out. I wonder if the Swooping Evil doesn't actually eat human beings as its primary diet, or at least some kind of primate. That would be quite scary to consider. Have you seen Dr. Lehman's video on Lovecraft? It's really funny, but interesting at the same time. He pointed out a really interesting point about this creature and theory in general. I don't know, maybe. I don't know if I've actually seen... I'd have to check my video history. The problem is when I'm actually doing work, I sit back here and a lot of things go playing in the background, so maybe I've... Okay, no, I'll take it as that. I'll say no because I don't actually pay attention to what I'm listening to. I remember the one day I was studying Japanese and I looked up an hour later and PewDiePie was on, and I don't really watch PewDiePie videos, but so yeah, maybe that snuck in some way. But I did read the Lovecraft books about two or 3 years ago, so I don't know if I might have forgotten in that time. But you say Dr. Lehman's video. I'll write that down. Dr. Layman. So he does videos on Lovecraft, does he? That sounds very interesting. I'd love to see them. A very interesting game for anybody interested in Lovecrafty stuff was Darkest Dungeon. Although, since you mentioned Dark Souls earlier, Dark Souls is actually quite Lovecraftian in itself. It's, about existential horror. Although, I don't know if existential horror counts as Lovecraft. Well, so I'm just like I'm just running through the stories in my mind because a lot of the Lovecraftian books are generally about being terrified at the big scary outs in the world, and does videos on social psychology. Okay, that sounds interesting. I don't know how Lovecraft is related to social psychology, but I'll give it a look see. But yeah, Lovecraft is all about big scary things in the world, things that we can't really process, and even though sometimes it's these giant monsters that like Cthulhu that they're so big we can't comprehend them. At the Mountains of Madness, actually, the main character witnesses Cthulhu, but he goes insane on the airplane and he doesn't actually know what he saw. He just his mind just snapped. But at other times we have things like the Reanimator, where we're just supposed to be terrified that this dead guy is chasing us down. If I remember the story of the Reanimator correctly, Herbert West brings to life a. It's actually very racist, but basically he brings to life a dead boxer who is of. Again, I don't want to trip any kind of YouTube checky thing, but he brings to life a person of African descent, and the way Lovecraft describes it is terrible. It's like he's describing a gorilla, and I thought, my word, you absolutely terrible. Well, this is a bad idea to have. Don't talk about human beings like they're freaking animals. But and then the gorilla human being thing. Uh, I, that's a touchy subject. Runs off and goes and eats a whole bunch of people. But later on, in sort of the continuing adventures of Herbert West, he brings to life some guy that died on a battlefield, and the head is separated. Now, obviously, that kind of doesn't work because the head is dead, but somehow there's a connection. It becomes sort of like a Dullahan, and this person is hunting down Herbert West throughout his life, and Herbert is just like the Dullahan is collecting a whole bunch of undead things using Herbert's serum to sort of hunt down Herbert. Oh no, it's not using Herbert's serum. Herbert is it's collecting all of Herbert's previous experiments to sort of take revenge on him, something like that. Uh, and I do recall. I think the Herbert's story ends with in a hotel or somewhere where it's written from the perspective of some random person who Herbert actually brings to life perfectly, but he's sort of still rotting away, and Herbert himself at that point has taken the reanimation serum. Sorry, this was a big waffle. Um, he does a video on psychology. Yes, the point of Lovecraft is that it's ambiguous. Yeah, exactly. It's very ambiguous, but it's also about like the terror in the dark, like not knowing what you're dealing with. The color from outer space was a particularly concerning one because it sort of ends the story with this blight is slowly growing, and ostensibly it's going to consume the entire world, but there's nothing we can do about it. And the good folks at Miskatonic University are just like, oh, okay, well, whatever. So yeah, even people who are learned can't solve the problem. Nearly that you don't know if the true story. Yeah, you don't know if the story is true or not because we can't really trust the protagonists. A very good example of an unreliable writer is the story. God, it was about Nyarlathotep. Nyarlathotep. Read that. It's a short story. What do you think the Cthulhu Horse is? A reptile or something else? I I don't know, because you see, reptiles do tend to have a limit on their body size. Now, I haven't done any research as to whether this is accurate or not. But my impression is that reptiles, after a certain size, their metabolism becomes unreasonable. The cold-blooded metabolism becomes a little bit unreasonable for a certain size. I know that crocodiles get incredibly large, but they're also rather sluggish. And I think that after a certain level of complexity, you do need a more warm-blooded metabolism. Think of all of the dinosaurs that we discussed previously that had avian type metabolisms. It's it could be a reptile, but again, it uses tentacles for its mouth, so I don't know. Incidentally, this is called a Grap Horn. This creature is called a Grap Horn, so not Cthulhu Horse, but that was the name that I gave it before I realized what it was called. Anyway, sorry, that was a big waffle about Cthulhu, and we're supposed to be talking about Harry Potter. I'm doing a very amazing job of not staying on topic, so I hope I hope you can enjoy that. Um, the next thing that I wanted to talk about was this. This is a very this is the main creature from that, well, sort of like the symbol creature from the film. It is called the Thunderbird. It sort of looks like a griffin, but not really. It's just a giant eagle-like creature. It's very it's very interesting because this is actually based on an exclusively American creature called a Teratorn. I think that's how it's pronounced. A Teratorn was that's a Quetzalcoatl. I'll go back to the Quetzalcoatl. I'm getting excited now. Um, a Teratorn was well, basically a giant bird. I think they got up to about 80 kilograms from some of the stuff that I saw, and even up to 130 kilograms of bird. As you can see, this is absolutely huge. Now, in cryptozoology, there were reports that people had encountered, or at least seen, things that appear to be teratorns. I suspect that these could have been just airplanes, kites or something like that. But very, very famously, people have ostensibly, I keep saying ostensibly, purportedly seen this creature. So the actual Thunderbird is, oh, wait, that was a different thing. The Thunderbird is actually based on a real creature. At first, as you can see by this image, I thought that it was something like a Quetzalcoatl or something like that, but Quetzalcoatl is actually a serpent as well. Um, Usually we consider it to be like a lightning bird, but the more I looked at the myth of Quetzalcoatl, it was a serpent, and this is also referring to previous videos that I've done on mythical creatures. So yeah, it's a serpent, definitely a serpent. Um, and the Thunderbird cannot exist. Interesting that you should say that because there are fossils of this creature. I don't think it could exist in modern times, and thank you for giving my waffling, by the way, there, Descent. Um, so yeah, again, it did exist. The Thunderbird did exist, at least for the size of the bird. But I I don't know if if it would survive in modern times. There's there's an idea that I've been considering for a while now. Ever since I read that book that I mentioned earlier, Guns, Germs, and Steel. The guy goes on about how the with the advent of human beings, all of the large mammals suddenly just dropped off. Like their extinction coincides with our appearance, and across every continent, the moment human beings appear, large mammals start to go extinct. So I wonder if that our appearance in America killed off the usual prey items that this bird would feast upon. and that if we indirectly caused quite a lot of ecological damage just by hunting to extinction many, many, many large mammalian creatures. So, yeah, that's just an interesting thing. It's again, it did exist ostensibly, but these fossils are really old. I don't know if we coexisted with these creatures though. I can't remember the timeline off the top of my head, but that was a thing. Could a reptilian avian type creature actually exist? Technically, the reptilian avian creatures, like, well, to use a cliched example like Archaeopteryx, those were dinosaurs, but again, dinosaurs are not necessarily reptilian. Remember, what makes a reptile is, by definition, it's cold-blooded metabolism. So, hypothetically, you could have any kind of flying creature with a cold-blooded metabolism, but flying does require a more active type of body type. So I imagine you could have a gliding creature. When we try to combine definitions like this, especially not arbitrary definitions, but human our from our perspective, definitions from our perspective, it becomes a bit weird when we sort of blur the lines. Consider the platypus, for example, or a dolphin. What ultimately defines a mammal is the structure of our inner ear. Not that we give birth to live young, because technically sharks give birth to live young. They just keep the eggs inside of them until the young come out. Um, and not all mammals give birth to live young like the platypus, but we have this just one small detail in common. And that small detail isn't actually even our metabolism, so who knows? Who knows? For now, I will say yes, that reptiles, you could have massive flying reptiles. I did discuss to a small extent the possibility of that in the dragon video that I had done. It doesn't really go into the metabolism of the creature though, but technically speaking, you could at a stretch have it. Um, it is a hexapodal vertebrate, which is impossible. This contradicts all of the vertebrate. Oh yeah, okay. Hexapodal vertebrates are, just for clarity, hexapodal would mean four limbs. Sorry, six limbs. What am I saying? Forgetting basic freaking counting words. Forgetting English. The theme of today's video. So hexapodal would mean that it has six limbs, and again, I don't want to say that six limbs is impossible for a vertebrate. I just say that that's not the evolutionary branch that vertebrates had taken. Ostensibly, you could have it. Ostensibly. No, no, not ostensibly. Theoretically, you could have it, but that's not the normal pattern that we see people following. Well, not people following, that we see creatures following. Usually we stick to four limbs. In this case, just for clarity's sake, the two primary limbs are the wings, obviously, and then you have another two limbs, the quadrupedal vertebrateness, the two secondary limbs being the legs, making four limbs. Yeah. They say, would scales work the same way as feathers? I couldn't imagine. Avian scales could work. Wouldn't they add weight to the flight though? No, probably not. We have petrosaurs, which are not dinosaurs, and they do actually have. Okay. Well, yeah. I don't have anything more to add to your conversation over there. That's pretty much that. I agree with it. You're quite on point here, Sithal. I I feel that I should have been less tired. I should have come home earlier last night, but alas, I was busy. As I said, like right at earlier, my apologies that I'm not as Genki as I should be, but the train ride from Osaka was just absolutely exhausting. And I nearly didn't wake up in time for the stream. So, despite having planned and prepared everything, I still got up only to prepare the time to get up. I needed to wake up like a minimum 2.5 hours prior to it, which I kind of didn't do that. I only got up 2 hours, so Anyway, that affects my ability to think. So I will use you as my secondary brain, Sith. Thank you so much. You are an absolute boon to this stream and probably the channel as a consequence. So, yay. I think if I recall, you have a channel, don't you? Do feel free to DM me or something, and I'll mention it at some point in the streams. So, yay. Not that I'm very popular, but you know, out of kindness, especially since you're doing so much for me. You should probably do the stream instead. Anyway, going on. Just one thing that caught my attention is that Newt mentions the Thunderbird was trafficked. And so that made me wonder, when did we start using the word trafficked in relation to animals? So I did a quick Google search and I did look at other things, but nothing was very visually impressive, so I brought this up. And obviously the word traffic has been, and I'm going to flick between these two, traffic has been used for quite a while throughout history, but trafficked as in the verb, well, past participle, he was trafficked. Past participle verb, again, sorry, my English is failing me today, is actually difficult to trace when this would have happened. When we would have started using this word. I looked at a lot of nature conservation organizations, and most of them started off in the 1950s, which is well after the setting of the Fantastic Beasts. So I'm not sure whether they would have had the idea of animal trafficking at this time and whether Newt should have been using that word. I know this is a little bit nitpicky, but it is something that I was quite curious about. So if anybody has any information on when we actually started considering animal trafficking to be bad, because I couldn't find really a lot of information. Animals have always been trafficked. Think of like ancient Rome. Ancient China was particularly bad for it. They would often give animals as gifts to each other, people within China and without. In modern times, they do it with pandas, though that's not really trafficking because it is sort of controlled. But in ancient times, this was a big problem. Ostensibly, no, not ostensibly. Widen your vocabulary, Rian. Don't be an idiot. So, my thought was, when did this start to become a problem? And I couldn't find anything earlier than the 1950s, 1940s time. So, yeah. Agreed. I don't think that I'm smart though. Well, you're helping me. It's thank you for helping me. Regardless of whether you believe yourself to be intelligent or not, you do at least have a lot of information on hand that I can rely on when my sleepy brain is starting to fall over on its side and plop out of my ear. So, again, deepest thanks. And yeah, so that was that. The Thunderbird. One last creature, and then I think we'll call it, because this has been quite long. Unless there's anything else that you guys would like to mention, especially with all of my sidetracking, is the Nudnu. This is where I wanted to save this for last, because now I'm going to actually really go hard on the criticism for the Fantastic Beasts wiki. Oh wait, sorry, I just got distracted by the message. I would assume related to animal intelligence. Animal trafficking relates to when people acknowledge animal intelligence. You can traffic in smaller things like insects, I guess, which I don't know. It's a cultural phenomenon that we would be trying to trace in that case. I don't know if it's a moral kind of thing. Well, I mean, it is related to morals, but trying to figure out when this happened is what I was trying to consider, and I just couldn't find any one starting point when Newt ought to have been using that word. Technically, though, we could say that he is a little bit ahead of his time, because the way that he is portrayed is that he's studying animals when the study of animals was not as popular as it is today. So, or as it should have been in those times. So we could we could consider that to be a thing. The Ministry for Magic does mention that they do control the movement of animals, and they arrested the Newt. Newt had a cover story that he wanted to visit someone about some other creature, and that they had cracked down on this man because he was, dealing with animals. Um, but he, again, I don't know when government starts to acknowledge this, and I couldn't find any laws related to this apart from like really old political controls to prevent people from taking animals as a bribe. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we considered animals to be, valuable in and of their own right. So that's what I was considering with that. Anyway, back to this Nunu. And as I said, this is where my criticism for the uh, wiki comes from, because it is very, very, very hyperbolic. This animal looks sort of, as you mentioned there, Sithal, of like a frilled lizard. It's actually a panther, but to me, it looked like there's a panther. It looked like a pufferfish, particularly these spined pufferfishes. I also thought of the frog's bladder, the voice bladder for the frog. Um, it was a bit difficult to place. Technically, in the wiki, let me quickly go to that in the wiki. It is referred to as a type of panther. And as I mentioned, the wiki is very hyperbolic with this. Very, very, very hyperbolic. Because it describes it as being the most poisonous. Just being anywhere near this creature, just you die. You die. If you look here at what I'm reading now, it says the Nudnu is a large East African beast that resembles a leopard. A panther, basically. It moves silently despite its gigantic size and is considered by some to be the most dangerous creature alive. So that means more dangerous than the dragons we have already seen in the series. The breath of the Nunu is toxic and filled with disease so potent that it can wipe out entire villages of people. The Nundu, sorry, I keep mispronouncing it. Nundu is extremely hard to subdue. It has never been defeated by less than around 100 wizards working together. Ooh, I wonder how Newt got it. Compared to the dragons used in the Tri-Wizard tournament, which were stunned into submission by around 10 wizards, the prospect of this rare beast becomes truly terrifying. So, why is everything in Newt's bag still alive? Is the main thing that I want to ask. Just a note on the appearance of the creature. The reason that I eventually connected it to the pufferfish was you can see it a little bit more clearly in this image, but on top of that, the fact that they mentioned poison and the pufferfish is known for its poison made me think, okay, this must be the connection. And so that's why eventually I chose the pufferfish as perhaps the inspiration for this. And it does look a little bit like a lion, sort of, with a lion's mane, so that might match it. Yeah, that's very hyperbolic, isn't it? Extremely hyperbolic. It's incredibly dangerous, and that's all I have to say on it. They say this person brought up the Nudnu as a cub. They have a history of this thing. The Nundu, sorry, I keep mispronouncing it. Edison Esrical owned a Nundu when he received it as a cub during a voyage to Africa to evade capture for a series of robberies he had committed. He used this Nundu to protect his home and large treasure he had accumulated inside it from robbing other London residents with his newly learned unlocking charm, keeping it subdued with a daily stunning spell when he was home and reviving it when he left. One day, however, when he found that all of the houses in the neighborhood were protected by a new anti-Alohomora charm, invented by Blagden Blay, yeah, he was so infuriated upon returning home that he neglected to stun his Nundu and was swiftly killed by the beast. So, stunning it prevents it from spreading disease. So this is an intentional thing that this creature can do. It's disease, but I don't know. This is a very weird creature. The thing that I was considering about the Nundu was how quickly this bladder inflates, because that is actually a large volume of air, and I don't think that it is reasonable, because I couldn't get exact measurements, but ultimately I decided to just settle on about a meter, meter and a half of well, a radius of about half a meter, 1.6, 1.7, sorry, 0.6, 0.7 meters, which for a creature that large to fill it suddenly with air, that is no small feat. It should ostensibly work like lungs in that case, I guess. But I thought maybe a series of small bladders along the neck could achieve the same effect. It's just I didn't have very much to say about this creature except that it was a little bit odd. They do mention it over here with the behind the scenes stuff that the Alden was a very powerful wizard, so ostensibly the power of 100 wizards, which, why was he robbing people then, is my question. Why not just conquering all of wizardom? But this is not a very nice creature to deal with. And they keep changing the stuff. They mention that the breath is poisonous, or that it's toxic, or that it has disease, or it's a bit weird. And of all of the big creatures in the series, that is the one that I actually have critique over. So yeah, I think that it would be interesting to look at the significance of snakes in historical sense, because snakes seem to represent eternity and recurrence. I think the Dark Souls idea of the dark sun, the circle of fire representing eternal life, more significantly eternal life, part of me never-ending death, more specifically. Indeed. That would be something that I will look at some point, perhaps. Maybe immortality would be a nice thing to add to the list of topics to cover, but I've been very slow. Anyway, with that, my brain is slowing down, and I honestly need to not do talking anymore. I've spoken circles and rings around stuff. So, yeah. Which especially seems to be a recurring theme, especially the curse of immortality. I shall leave now. Goodbye. Okay. So, yeah, with that, guys, I think that was a good stream. I spoke way too much. Thank you for joining me. I hope you guys enjoyed it. And this was a bit of Fantastic Beasts. We spoke about a lot of things. We didn't really say much, but I hope you guys had fun. So, as always, you can find me by subscribing to anything over here and also Twitter stuff at the bottom. Don't be shy to tweet me. I'm very lazy when it comes to tweets, so perhaps leaving messages in the chat of the videos is better, but you can tweet me as well. And don't forget, Sloth, if you... I think you have a channel, I can't remember, but if you do and you want me to share it, do message me or something like that. Otherwise, guys, yeah, I'll call it for that, and cheerio. Goodbye.